Hello again, it's Dan Fossard and I'm going to read to you again from the book Think and Grow Rich. This is chapter 2 in a series of 16. I'm going to read out loud each chapter in each video. As again, part of the chapter 4 on auto-suggestion suggests reading that particular chapter, chapter 4, out loud. And I thought, you know what, why not read the entire book? A, it gives me an excuse to read the book again, which is brilliant. B, it gives me a chance to put that information into my brain 3 times as much as if I just read it to myself and, film myself making videos. So this is chapter 2 of Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Desire, the starting point of all achievement, in brackets, the first step to riches. When Edwin C. Barnes climbed down from the freight train in Orange, New Jersey, he may have resembled a tramp, but his thoughts were those of a king. As he made his way to Thomas Edison's office, his mind was at work. He saw himself standing in Edison's presence. He heard himself asking Mr. Edison for an opportunity to carry out one of the consuming obsessions of his life, a burning desire to become the business associate of the great inventor. Barnes's desire was not a hope. It was not a wish. It was a keen, pulsating desire, which transcended everything else. It was definite. The desire was not new when he approached Edison. It had been Barnes's dominating desire for a long time. In the beginning, when the desire first appeared in his mind, it may have been, probably was, only a wish, but no mere wish when he appeared before Edison with it. A few years later, Edwin Barnes again stood before Edison in the same office where he first met the inventor. This time his desire had been translated into a reality. He was in business with Edison. The dominating dream of his life had become a reality. Today, people who knew Barnes envy him because of the break life yielded him. They see him in the days of his triumph without taking the trouble to investigate the cause of his success. Barnes succeeded because he chose a definite goal and placed all of his energy and his willpower and all his effort into achieving that goal. He did not become the partner of Edison the day he arrived. He was content to start in the most not menial of work, as long as it provided an opportunity to take even one step closer towards achieving his cherished goal. 5 years passed before the chance he had been seeking made its appearance. During all those years, not one ray of hope, not one promise of attainment of his desire had been held out to him. To everyone except himself, he appeared only another cog in the Edison business wheel, but in his own mind, he was the partner of Edison every minute of the time from the very first day he worked there. It's a remarkable illustration of the power of a definite desire. Barnes won his goal because he wanted to be the business associate of Mr. Edison more than he wanted anything else. He created a plan by which to attain that purpose. He burned all the bridges behind him. He stood by his desire until it became a dominating obsession with his life and finally a fact. When he went to New Jersey, he did not say to himself, "I will try to induce Edison to give me a job of some sort." He said, "I will see Edison and put him on notice that I've come to go into business with him." He did not say, "I'll work there for a few months, and if I get no encouragement I will quit and get a job somewhere else." He did say, "I will start anywhere and do anything Edison tells me to do before I am through. I will be his associate." He did not say, "I will keep my eyes open for another opportunity in case I fail and get what I want in the Edison organisation. There is but one thing in this world I am determined to have, and that is the business association with Thomas A. Edison. I will burn all bridges behind me and stake my entire future on the ability to get what I want." He left himself no possible way of retreat. He had to win or perish. That's all there was to it. That's all there was to the story of Barnes' success. A long while ago, a great warrior had to make a decision which ensured his success on the battlefield. He was about to send his armies again to a powerful foe, whose men outnumbered his own. He loaded his soldiers into boats, sailed them to the enemy's country, unloaded soldiers and equipment, and gave the order to burn ships that carried them. Addressing his men before the first battle, he said, "You see the boats going up in smoke? That means we cannot leave these shores alive unless we win. We now have no choice. We win or we die. They won. Every person who wins in an undertaking must be willing to burn his ships and cut all sources of retreat. Only by doing so can one be sure of maintaining that state of mind known as the burning desire to win, essential to success. The morning after the Great Chicago Fire, a group of merchants stood on State Street looking at the smoking remains of what had been their stores. Again, they went into a conference to decide if they should try and rebuild or leave Chicago and start over in a more promising part of the country. They reached a decision, all except one, to leave Chicago. The merchant who decided to stay and rebuild pointed a finger at the remains of his store and said, "Gentlemen, on the very spot I will build the world's greatest store, no matter how many times it may have burnt down." The store was built. It stands there today, a towering monument to the power of that state of mind known as a burning desire. The easy thing for Marshall Field to have done would have been exactly as his fellow merchants did. When the going was hard and the future looked dismal, they pulled up and went elsewhere. Mark well this difference between Marshall Field and the other merchants, because it is the same difference that distinguishes Edwin Barnes from thousands of other young men who have worked in the Edison organisation. It's the same difference that distinguishes practically all who succeed from all who fail. Every human being who understands the purpose of money wishes for it. Wishing will not bring riches, but desires. But desiring riches within a state of mind that becomes an obsession, then planning definite ways and means to acquire those riches, and backing those plans with persistence which does not recognise failure, will bring riches. The method by which desire for riches can be transmuted into its financial equivalent consists of 6 definite practical steps. 1. Fix in your mind the exact amount of money you desire. It is not sufficient merely to say, "I want plenty of money." Be definite as to the amount. There is a psychological reason for definiteness, which will be described in a subsequent chapter. 2. Determine exactly what you intend to give in return for the money you desire. There is no such thing as something for nothing. 3. Establish a definite date when you intend to possess the money you desire. 4. Create a definite plan for carrying out your desire and begin at once, whether you are ready or not, to put this plan into action. 5. Write out a clear, concise statement of the amount of money you intend to acquire. Name the time limit for its acquisition. State what you intend to give in return for the money and describe clearly the plan through which you intend to accumulate it. 6. Read your written statement aloud twice daily, once just before retiring at night and once after rising in the morning. As you read, see and feel and believe yourself already in possession of the money. Read that bit again. As you read, see and feel and believe yourself already in possession of that money. It is important that you follow the instructions described in these 6 steps. It is especially important that you observe and follow the instructions in the 6th paragraph. Read that again. As you read, see and feel and believe yourself already in possession of the money. You may complain that it is impossible for you to see yourself in possession of money before you actually have it. Here is where a burning desire will come to your aid. If you truly desire money so keenly that your desire is an obsession, you will have no difficulty in convincing yourself that you will acquire it. The object is to want money and to become so determined to have it that you convince yourself you will have it. Only those who become money conscious ever accumulate great riches. Money consciousness means that the mind has become so thoroughly saturated with the desire for money that one can see oneself already in possession of it. To those who have not been schooled in the working principles of the human mind, these instructions may appear impractical. It may be helpful to all who fail to recognise the soundness of the 6 steps, to know that the information they convey was received from Andrew Carnegie, who began as an ordinary labourer in the steel mills. Despite his humble beginnings, Carnegie managed to make these principles yield him a fortune of considerably more than $100 million. It may be further helped to know that these 6 steps recommended were carefully scrutinised by Thomas A. Edison. He placed a stamp of approval among them as being not only the 6 steps essential for the accumulation of money, but also for the attainment of a definite goal. The steps call for no hard labour, they call for no sacrifice, they do not require one to become ridiculous or credulous. To apply them calls for no great amount of education, but the successful applicant of these 6 steps does call for a sufficient imagination in able to want to see and to understand that accumulation of money cannot be left to chance, good luck, or fortune. One must realise that all who have accumulated great fortunes first did a certain amount of dreaming, hoping, wishing, desiring, and planning before they acquired the money. You may as well know also that every great leader from the dawn of civilization down to the present was a dreamer. If you do not see great riches in your imagination, you will never see them in your bank balance. Never has there been so great an opportunity for practical dreamers as now exists. We who are in this race for riches should be encouraged to know that this dynamic world in which we are now demanding new ideas, new ways of thinking, new leaders, new inventions, new methods of teaching, new methods of marketing, new books, new literature, new applications for computers, new cures for diseases, new approaches for every aspect of business and life. Behind this demand for new and better things, there is only one quality one must possess to win. That is, the definiteness of purpose, the knowledge of what one wants and a burning desire to possess it. To accomplish this requires practical dreamers who can and will put their dreams into action. The practical dreamers have always been and will always be the pattern makers of civilization. We who desire to accumulate riches should remember that the real leaders of the world have always been the people who harnessed and put into practical use the intangible, unseen forces of unborn opportunity. They have converted those forces or impulses of thought into skyscrapers, cities, factories, aeroplanes, cars, better healthcare, and every form of convenience that makes life more pleasant. Tolerance and an open mind are practical necessities for the dreamer of today. Those who are afraid of new ideas are doomed before they start. Never has there been a time more favourable to pioneers than the present. There is a vast business, financial and industrial world to be remoulded and redirected along new and better lines. In planning to acquire your share of riches, let no one influence you to scorn the dreamer. To win the big stakes in this ever-changing world, you must catch the spirit of the great pioneers of the past, whose dreams have given to civilization all that it has of value, the spirit which serves as the lifeblood of our society. Your opportunity and mine to develop and market our talents. Let us not forget, Columbus dreamed of an unknown world, staked his life in the existence of such a world, and discovered it. Copernicus, the great astronomer, dreamed of a multiplicity of worlds and revealed them. No one denounced him as impractical after he had triumphed. Instead, the world worshipped at his shrine, thus proving once more that success requires no apologies, and failure permits no alibis. If the thing you wish to do is right, and you believe in it, go ahead and do it. Put your dream across, and never mind what they say if you meet with temporary defeat, for they, perhaps, do not know that every failure brings with it the seed of an equivalent success. Henry Ford, poor and uneducated, dreamed of a horseless carriage. He went to work with the tools he possessed, without waiting for an opportunity to favour him, and now evidence of his dream belts the entire earth. He has put more wheels into operation than any man who ever lived because he was not afraid to back his dreams. Thomas Edison dreamed of a lamp that would be operated by electricity. Despite more than 10,000 failures, he stood by until that dream was made a physical reality. Practical dreamers do not quit. Lincoln dreamed of freedom for the black slaves, put his dream into action, and barely missed living to see united North and South translate his dream into reality. The Wright brothers dreamed of a machine that could fly through the air. Now one may see evidence all over the world that they all dreamed soundly. Marconi dreamed of a system for harnessing the intangible forces of the ether. Evidence that he did not dream in vain may be found in every radio, TV and cell phone in the world. Moreover, Marconi's dream brought the humblest cabin and the most stately manor house side by side. It made the people of every nation on earth next door neighbours by creating a medium where news, information and entertainment could instantly be disseminated throughout the world. It may interest you to know that Marconi's friends had taken him into custody and examined him in a psychiatric hospital when he announced that he discovered a principle through which he could send messages through the air without the aid of wires or other direct physical means of communication. The dreamers of today fare better. The world has become accustomed to new discoveries. Indeed, it has shown a willingness to reward the dreamer who gives the world a new idea. The world is filled with an abundance of opportunity, which the dreamers of the past never knew. A burning desire to be and to do is the starting point from which the dreamer must take off. Dreams are not born of indifference, laziness or lack of ambition. The world no longer scoffs at dreamers, nor calls them impractical. Remember that all who succeed in life get off to a bad start and pass through many heartbreaking struggles before they arrive. Their turning point in the lives of those who succeed usually comes at the moment after some crisis, through which they are introduced to their other selves. John Bunyan wrote The Pilgrim's Progress after he had been confined in a prison and sorely punished because of his religious views. Mr. Henry discovered that the genius that slept within his brain after he had met with great misfortune was confined in a prison cell in Columbus, Ohio. Being forced through misfortune and becoming acquainted with his other self, and to use his imagination, he discovered himself to be a great author instead of a miserable criminal and outcast. Strange and varied are the ways of life, and stranger still are the ways of infinite intelligence, through which people are sometimes forced to undergo all sorts of punishment before discovering within their own brains and their own capacity to create useful ideas through imagination. Edison, the world's greatest inventor and scientist, was a part-time telegraph operator. He failed innumerable times before he was driven, finally, to the discovery of the genius that slept within his brain. Charles Dickens began by pasting labels on blacking pots. The tragedy of his first love penetrated the depths of his soul and converted him to one of the world's truly great authors. Disappointment over love affairs generally has the effect of driving people to drink and ruin. This is because most people have learned the art of transmuting their strongest emotions and dreams into a constructive nature. Helen Keller became deaf, dumb and blind shortly after birth. Despite her great misfortune, her name is written indelibly on the pages of the history of the great. Her entire life served as evidence that no one is ever defeated until defeat has been accepted as a reality. Robert Burns was an illiterate country lad. He was cursed by poverty and grew up to be a drunkard. The world was made better for his having lived because he clothed beautiful thoughts in poetry, thereby plucking a thorn and planting a rose in its place. Booker Washington was born in slavery, handicapped by race and colour. Because he was tolerant and had an open mind at all other times, on all other subjects, he was a dreamer. He left his impress for a good on an entire race. Beethoven was deaf, Milton was blind, but their names will last long as time endures because they dreamed and translated their dreams into organised thought. Before passing on to the next chapter, kindle anew in your mind the fire of hope, faith, courage and tolerance. If you have these states of mind and a working knowledge of these principles described, all else that you need will come to you when you are ready for it. Let Emerson state the thought of these words: every proverb, every book, every byword that belongs to thee, for aid and comfort shall surely come home through open and winding passages. Every friend whom not thy fantastic will, but the great and tender soul of thee craveth, shall lock thee in his embrace. There is a difference between wishing for a thing and being ready to receive it. No one is ready for a thing until he believes he can acquire it. The state of mind must be belief, not mere hope or wish. Open-mindedness is essential for belief. Closed minds do not inspire faith, courage or belief. Remember, no more effort is required to aim high in life, to demand abundance and prosperity, than is required to accept misery and poverty. A great poet has correctly stated this in a universal truth through these lines: I bargained with life for a penny, and life would pay no more. However I begged at evening, when I counted my scanty store. for life is just an employer. He gives you what you ask, but once you have set the wages, why you must bear the task. I worked for a menial's hire, only to learn, dismayed, that any wage I'd asked for life, life would have willingly paid. Okay. Imagine yourself successful. Always picture yourself successful. Visualize the person you desire to become. Set aside each day a time to be alone and undisturbed. Get comfortable and relax. Close your eyes and concentrate on your desires and goals. See yourself in this new environment, capable and self-confident. Reflect on your past successes. Every success, be it large or small, is proof that you are capable of achieving more success. Celebrate each success. You can recall it when you begin to lose faith in yourself. Set definite goals. Have a clear direction of where you want to go. Be aware that you begin to deviate from these goals and take immediate corrective action. Respond positively to life. Develop a positive self-image. Your image, your action to life and your decisions are completely within your control. Desire outwits Mother Nature. As a fitting climax of the chapter, I wish to introduce you to one of the most unusual people I've ever known. I first saw him a few minutes after he was born. He came into the world without any physical sign of ears. The doctors admitted, when pressed for an opinion, that the child might be deaf and mute for life. I challenged the doctor's opinion, and had the right to do so. I was the child's father. I too reached for a decision and rendered an opinion, but I expressed the opinion silently in the secrecy of my own heart. I decided that my son would hear and speak. Nature could send me a child without ears, but nature could not induce me to accept the reality of this affliction. In my own mind, I knew that my son would hear or speak. How? I was sure must be a way, and I knew I would find it. I thought of the words of the immortal Emerson. The whole course of things goes to teach us faith. We only need obey. This is guidance for each of us, and by lowly listening, we shall hear the right word. The right word? Desire. More than anything else, I desired that my son should not be a deaf mute. From that desire, I never receded, not for a second. Many previous years, I'd written, our only limitations are those we set up in our own minds. For the first time, I wondered if that statement were true. Lying on the bed, in front of me was a newly born child without the natural equipment of hearing. Even though he might hear and speak, he was obviously disfigured for life. Surely, this was a limitation that the child had not set up in his own mind. What could I do about it? Somehow, I would find a way to transplant into that child's mind my own burning desire for ways and means of conveying sound to his brain without the aid of ears. As soon as the child was old enough to cooperate, I would fill his mind so completely with a burning desire to hear that nature would, by methods of her own, translate it into physical reality. All this thinking took place in my own mind, and I spoke it to no one. Every day I renewed the pledge I had made to myself not to accept a deaf mute for a son. As he grew older and began to take notice of things around him, we observed that he had a slight degree of hearing. When he reached the age when children usually begin talking, he made no attempt to speak, but we could tell by his actions that he could hear certain sounds. That was all I wanted to know. I was convinced that if he could hear, even slightly, he might be able to develop a still greater hearing capacity. Then something happened which gave me hope. It came from an entirely unexpected source. We bought a record player. When a child heard music for the first time, he went into ecstasy and promptly appropriated the machine. He soon showed a preference for certain records, among them It's a Long Way to Tipperary. On one occasion, he played that piece over and over again for almost 2 hours, standing in front of the record player with his teeth clamped on the edges of the case. The significance of this self-formed habit did not become clear to us until years later. We have never heard of the principle of bone conduction of sound at that time. Shortly after he appropriated the record player, I discovered that he could hear me quite clearly when I spoke with my lips touching his mastoid bone behind his ear, or at the base of his brain. These discoveries placed in my possession the necessary media by which I began to translate into reality my burning desire to help my son develop hearing and speech. By that time he was making stabs at certain words. The outlook was far from encouraging, but the desire backed by faith knows no such word as impossible. Having determined that he could hear the sound of my voice plainly, I began immediately to transfer his mind to the desire to hear and speak. I soon discovered that the child enjoyed bedtime stories, so I went to work creating stories designed to develop him into self-reliance, imagination and a keen desire to hear and be normal. There was one story in particular which emphasised by giving it some new and dramatic colouring each time it was told. It was designed to plant in his mind the thought that his affliction was not a liability, but an asset of great value. Despite the fact that all philosophy I had examined clearly indicated that every adversity brings with it seed of an equivalent advantage, I must confess that I had not the slightest idea of how this affliction could ever become an asset. However, I continued the practice of wrapping that philosophy in bedtime stories, hoping that the time would come when he would find some plan by which his handicap could be made to serve some useful purpose. Reason told me plainly that there was no adequate compensation for the lack of ears and natural hearing equipment. Desire, backed by faith, pushed aside and inspired me to carry on. As I analyse the experience in my retrospect, I can see now that my son's faith in me had much to do with the astounding results. He did not question anything I told him. I told him that the idea that he had a distinct advantage over his older brother, and that this advantage would reflect itself in many ways. For example, the teachers in school would observe that he had no ears, and because of this they would show him special attention and treatment with extraordinary kindness. They always did. His mother saw too that by visiting the teachers and arranging with them to give the child extra attention necessary. I sold him the idea too that when he became old enough to sell newspapers, his elder brother already had a paper round, he would have a big advantage over his brother because people would pay him extra money for his wares, because he could see that he was a bright, industrious boy despite the fact he had no ears. We noticed that gradually the child's hearing was improving. Moreover, he had not the slightest tendency to be self-conscious because of his afflictions. When he was about 7, he showed the first evidence of our method of serving his mind was bearing fruit. For several months he begged for the privilege of selling newspapers, but his mother would not give her consent. She was afraid that his deafness made it unsafe for him to go out into the street alone. Finally he took matters into his own hands. One afternoon, when he was left at home with the servants, he climbed through the kitchen window, shinned down to the ground and set out on his own. He borrowed 6 cents in capital from the neighbourhood shoemaker, invested it in newspapers, sold out, reinvested, and kept repeating until late in the evening. After balancing his accounts and paying back the 6 cents he had borrowed from his banker, he had a net profit of 42 cents. When he got home that night, he found himself in bed asleep with the money tightly clenched in his hand. His mother opened his hand, removed the coins and cried. Of all things, crying over her son's first victory seemed so inappropriate. My reaction was the reverse. I laughed heartily, for I knew that my endeavour to plant the child's mind an attitude of faith in himself had been successful. His mother saw, in his first business venture, a little deaf boy who had gone out into the streets and risked his life to earn money. I saw a brave, ambitious, self-reliant little businessman whose stock in himself had increased 100% because he had gone into business on his own initiative and had won. The transaction pleased me because I knew he had given evidence of a trait of resourcefulness that would go with him all his life. Later events proved this to be true. When his older brother wanted something, he would lie down on the floor, kick his feet in the air and cry for it and get it. When the little deaf boy wanted something, he would plan a way of earning that money, then buy it for himself. He still follows that plan to this day. Truly, my own son has taught me that a handicap can be converted into stepping stones on which one may climb towards some worthy goal, unless they are accepted as obstacles and used as alibis. The little deaf boy went through the grades in high school and college without being able to hear his teachers except when they shouted at him. He did not go to school for the deaf. We would not permit him to learn sign language. We were determined that he would have a normal life and associate with normal children. and when we stood by that decision, although it cost us many heated debates with the school officials. While he was in high school, we tried an electrical hearing aid, but it was of no value to him. We believed this was due to the condition that was disclosed when the child was 6. Dr. Wilson of Chicago operated on the side of the boy's head and discovered that there was no sign of natural hearing equipment. During his last week of college, 18 years after the operation, something happened which marked the most important turning point of his life. Through what seemed to be mere chance, he came into possession of another electrical hearing device, which was sent to him on a trial. He was slow about testing it due to his disappointment with a similar device. Finally, he picked up the instrument and more or less carelessly placed it on his head, hooking up the battery, and lo, as if by magic, his lifelong desire for normal hearing became a reality. For the first time in his life, he heard practically as well as anyone with good normal hearing. God moves in mysterious ways. His wonders to perform. Overjoyed because of the change the world had brought about him through this hearing device, he rushed to the telephone and called his mother and heard her voice perfectly. The next day, he plainly heard the voices of his professors in class for the very first time in his life, and he heard the radio in the cinema. For the first time, he could converse freely with other people without them having to speak loudly. Truly, he had come to possession of the changed world. We had refused to accept nature's error, and by persistent desire, we had induced nature to correct that error through the only practical means available. Desire had commenced to pay dividends, but the victory was not yet complete. The boy had still to find a definite and practical way to convert his handicap into an equivalent asset. Hardly realising the significance of what had already been accomplished, but intoxicated with the joy of his newly discovered world of sound, he wrote a letter to the manufacturer of the hearing aid, enthusiastically describing his experience. Something in his letter, something perhaps which was not written on the lines but between them, caused the company to invite him to New York. When he arrived, he was escorted through the factory. While taking the chief engineer, telling him about his changed world, a hunch, an idea, or an inspiration, call it what you wish, flashed into his mind. It was this impulse of thought which converted his affliction into an asset destined to pay dividends in both money and happiness to thousands for all time to come. The sum of substance of that impulse of thought was this. It occurred to him that he might be able to help the millions of deaf people who go through life without the benefit of hearing devices, if he could find a way to tell them the story of his changed world. There and then, he reached a decision to devote the remainder of his life to providing a useful service for the hard of hearing. For an entire month, he carried out intensive research. He analysed the entire marketing system of the manufacturing of hearing devices, and created ways and means of communicating with the hard of hearing all over the world for the purpose of sharing with them his newly discovered changed world. When this was done, he wrote a 2-year plan based upon his findings. On presenting the plan to the company, he was instantly given a position for the purpose of carrying out his ambition. Little did he dream that when he went to work, that he was destined to bring hope and practical relief to thousands of deaf people. Without his help, would have been doomed to forever deaf mutism. Shortly after he became associated with the manufacturer of his hearing aid, he invited me to attend a class conducted by his company for the purpose of teaching deaf mutes to hear and speak. I'd never heard of such a form of education, therefore I visited the class sceptical, but I hoped that my time would not be entirely wasted. Here I saw a demonstration that gave me a greatly enlarged vision of what I had done to arouse and keep alive my son's mind, the desire for some normal hearing. I saw deaf mutes actually being taught to speak and hear through application of the same principles I had used more than 20 years previously in saving my son from deaf mutism. Thus, through the same strange turn of the wheel of fate, my son, Blair, and I, destined to an aid in correcting deaf mutism for those as yet unborn. There is no doubt in my mind that Blair would have been a deaf mute all his life if his mother and I had not managed to shape his mind as we did. When Blair was an adult, Dr. Irving Voorhuis was nominated specialist on such case, examined him thoroughly. He was astounded to learn how well my son hears and speaks, and said his examination indicated that theoretically the boy should not be able to hear at all, but the lad does, despite the fact that X-ray pictures show there is no opening in the skull whatsoever from where the ears should be to the brain. When I planted in his mind the desire to hear and talk and live as a normal person, there went the impulse some strange influence which caused nature to become a build bridger and span the gulf of silence between his brain and the outer world by some means which kept medical specialists have not which the keenest medical specialists have not been able to interpret. It would be sacrilege for me to even conjecture how the nature performed this miracle. It would be unforgivable if I neglected to tell the world as much as I know of the humble part I assumed in the strange experience. It is my duty and privilege to say I believe, not without reason, that nothing is impossible to the person who backs desire with enduring faith. I have no doubt that a burning desire has devious ways of transmuting itself into physical equivalent. Blair desired normal hearing. Now he has it. He was born with a handicap which might easily have sent one with less divine desire into the street with a bundle of pencils and a tin cup. The handicap now promises to serve as the medium by which he will render useful service to many millions of hard hearing, as well as to give him a useful employment to adequate financial compensation for the remainder of his life. The little white lies I planted in his mind when he was a child, leading him to believe his affliction would become a great asset on which he could capitalise, have been justified. There is nothing right or wrong which belief plus a burning desire cannot make real. These qualities are free to everyone. In all my experience in dealing with men and women who had personal problems, I've never handled a single case which more definitely demonstrates the power of desire. Authors sometimes make the mistake of writing of subjects of which they have but superficial or very elementary knowledge. It's been my good fortune and have had the privilege of testing the soundness of the power of desire through the affliction of my own son. Perhaps it was providential that the experience came as it did, for surely no one is better prepared than he to serve as an example of what happens when a desire is put into a test. If Mother Nature bends the will of desire, it is logical that mere men can defeat a burning desire. Strange and imponderable is the power of the human mind. We do not understand the methods by which it uses every circumstance, every individual, every physical thing within its reach as a medium of transmuting desires into physical counterpart. Perhaps science will uncover this secret. I planted in my son's mind the desire to hear and speak as any normal person that hears and speaks. That desire is now a reality. I planted in his mind the desire to convert his greatest handicap into his greatest asset. That desire has become a reality. The modus operandi by which the astounding result was achieved is not hard to describe. It consists of three very definite acts. First, I mixed faith with desire for normal hearing, which I passed to my own son. Second, I communicated my desire to him in every conceivable way, through persistent, continuous effort over a period of time. Third, he believed me. Several years ago, one of my business associates became ill. He became worse as time went on, and finally was taken into the hospital for an operation. Just before he was wheeled into the operating theatre, I took a look at him and wondered how anyone as thin as him and emaciated could have possibly go through a major successful operation. The doctor warned me that there was little, if any, chance of him ever seeing him alive again, but that was the doctor's opinion. It was not the opinion of the patient. Just before he was wheeled away, he whispered feebly, "Do not be disturbed, Chief. I'll be out of here in a few days." The attending nurse looked at me with pity, but the patient did come through safely. After it was all over, his physician said, nothing but his own desire to live saved him. He never would have pulled through if he had not refused to accept the possibility of his death. I believe that the power of desire backed by faith, because I have seen this power lift people from lowly beginnings to places and power of wealth. I have seen it rob the graves of its victims. I have seen it serve as the medium by which people staged a comeback, having been defeated in 100 different ways. I have seen it provide my own son with normal, happy, successful life, despite nature having sent him into the world without ears. How can one harness and use the power of desire? This has been answered through the chapter of this book and subsequent chapters of this book. I wish to convey thought that all achievement, no matter what its nature or purpose, must begin with an intense, burning desire for something definite. Through some strange and powerful principles of mental chemistry, nature wraps up in the impulse of strong desire that something which recognises no such word is impossible and accepts no such reality as failure. Thanks. That is chapter 2 of Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Thanks for watching.